Hey, this is Mohal Joshi from Los Angeles, California. I follow Indian foreign policy and defense with a special focus on Asia. You can follow me on Twitter at Mohal Joshi.
Hey, this is Kishor from Bengaluru in India. I am an international relations expert specializing in global security, conflict resolution, and international negotiation. My focus areas include peace building and digital diplomacy. You can find me on Twitter at Veggie Diplomat.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to episode 8 of India Rising Strategic Conversations with Mohal and Kishor, a show in which we analyze happenings from around the world and their impact on India. So, before we begin with today's episodes, we would like to have an update on earlier episode. Now, remember, folks, that we had extensively discussed in episode 5 the impact of the shocking results in the recently concluded presidential elections in the Republic of Maldives. We had then specified that the outgoing President Abdullah Yamin might throw a few tantrums before agreeing to abdicate his position. He managed to do so exactly despite the watchful eyes of all the major powers from around the world, including India, the US, and the European Union. Eventually, he had to relent for a smooth transition. Uh, Ibrahim Muhammad Soli, commonly known as Ibu Soli, was then sworn in as the seventh president of the Republic of Maldives. As expected, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Malé to attend the swearing in ceremony. Modi was received at the airport by Soli himself and was made to sit between two former presidents, Mohammad Nasheed and Mohammad Abdul Gayoom, during the inauguration. And I should also mention he did also get the customary Modi jappi or hug.
Yeah,
During the
Modi.
inauguration, Ibu Soli stated that he will regain the lost relationship with the international community with his country's national interests in mind. While claiming that he wants to keep close relations with his neighbors in India, he announced that he would have a special meeting with Modi immediately after the swearing in ceremony. Later in the day, the two leaders met up and Soli personally saw Modi off at the airport. A joint press statement was issued at the end of the meeting, which said that both Indian and Maldives leaders expressed confidence in the renewal of close bonds, agreed to be mindful of each other's concerns and aspirations for stability of the region. In addition, steps are being taken to chalk out a date for Ibu Soli's maiden visit to India soon, probably in December, and also for Modi to have a official visit to Maldives thereafter. So, coming back to today's episodes, we will be talking a lot about the bizarre sequence of events that are being witnessed to our neighbor to the south in Sri Lanka. Which has led to a constitutional crisis in the island nation. Now, while some started opining that this was a power game being played out by the high and mighty, the jury is still out in the open and we haven't heard the last just yet. On 26th October, news came out from Sri Lanka and the United People's Freedom Alliance, headed by current president uh, Maithripala Sirisena, had withdrawn from the coalition government. Shortly after, more news stumbled out that Mahinda Rajapaksa, the former president of Sri Lanka, had been sworn in as the prime minister by President Sirisena. This is where the problem began. Now, Ranil Wickremesinghe, the incumbent prime minister, insisted that he was the legitimate prime minister of Sri Lanka since he enjoyed the support of the members of parliament. Amidst all this was a stand taken by the Speaker of the Sri Lankan Parliament, who supported Wickremesinghe's claim that he continued to be the PM and evenly openly announced that he wasn't considering Rajapaksa as a newly appointed PM. So we have this uniquely bizarre situation of Sri Lanka having a president's prime minister and a speaker's prime minister. So, Kishore, what was the main trigger for all of this? Where did this all started going downhill between the two former allies, Vikramasinghe and Sirisena?
Yeah, this all started about a couple of months ago. In fact, I remember having tweeted about it back then. Basically, the point was that news broke out that there was a plot to assassinate President Sirisena and also brother of Mahinda Rajapaksa, who himself was a former Secretary of Defense, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. This was at that time thought to be an outcome of a tiff between two senior officers in the Sri Lankan police force, and Wickremesinghe promptly initiated an investigation. Now, what happened was, to everyone's surprise, suddenly there emerged an India angle to this whole plot. India's premier investigative agency, RAW, Research and Analysis Wing, was involved in this plot apparently. Sirisena also kept indirectly hinting in his cabinet meetings that India was involved, amounting to a direct insinuation. In fact, a person of Indian origin was also arrested on the outskirts of Colombo connected to this case. But it later turned out that this person was a Malayali person from Kerala who had walked out of his house in Kerala about a decade ago and was now living in Sri Lanka. In fact, preliminary investigation on this person even concluded that this person had no connection to intelligence agencies. He used to wander aimlessly in his adopted hometown in Sri Lanka and was also considered to be a senile person, believe it. So, for all practical purposes, this lead turned out to be a dead end for the investigating officers. Now, once the Indian angle died down, a new cabinet angle emerged. Sirisena's office was quick to deny statements that the Indian investigative agency was involved. But then he instead started making another set of claims telling that a minister in the cabinet himself was involved in this attempt to assassinate the president. President Sirisena felt that he was within his right to dismiss the cabinet, including the prime minister, as it related to matters of national security. Remember, Sri Lanka is a country which has had to deal with multiple attempts on life of sitting prime ministers and presidents. Even the then president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, was assassinated while in power. So Sri Lanka is a country which takes its national security quite seriously. However, this news of alleged plot to assassinate came as a surprise since the primary target was the president and the alleged conspirators were from his own cabinet. But we have to also go back to the Indian angle a little more. The Hindu, the English language newspaper here in India, carried out an investigative article which upended the entire investigation, only making it murkier. It reported a discussion that seems to have taken place when the cabinet of ministers of Sri Lanka were deliberating on national issues. Apparently, Sirisena's office had off the record claimed that the office of the PM of India, the office itself, was involved in this plot directly. Although the president's office was quick to issue a statement vehemently denying such media reports, the damage had already been done. It was a serious blow to India-Sri Lanka relations. Looked at it from any angle, this was bad news for the office of the Prime Minister of India. As far as Narendra Modi was concerned, it was a grave matter for him to conduct India's foreign relations with other foreign countries in the region at a time when the president of Sri Lanka was making a serious allegation. According to media reports, that section of the Prime Minister's office had conspired to assassinate him and a few others. Simply because this has far reaching implications for the office of the Prime Minister of India and his credibility in conducting foreign relations with other heads of state in the region. Now, as if this was not enough, Senior Cabinet Minister Mahinda Amaravira, he was reported as saying that RAW had infiltrated into the cabinet and that four ministers were its agents. While none of this ever gained traction, N. Ram, chairman of Kasturi and Sons Limited, which owns the Hindu newspaper and who has also been its former editor, claimed that the newspaper stands by the report it had published. Now, while Sri Lanka itself is going through all this turmoil, unwillingly a lot of damage has also been imparted on the bilateral Indo-Sri Lankan ties, and the Sri Lankan government will have to walk that extra mile to repair the damage before things get any more uglier.
Yeah, up till now, I think we had heard of anything in Pakistan going wrong being blamed on Raw. I believe this is the first time somebody in Sri Lanka has blamed Raw. I think Raw has been the consistent whipping boy of our neighbors when anything in their country goes wrong or sinister plot is supposedly hatched.
Looks like that, yeah.
So at this stage, the world powers have reacted with caution, while the US and India were muted in the response early on. Eventually, both of them indicated that they were getting worried about the turn of events in Colombo and suggested a return to the status quo to restore stability in the island nation.
Yeah, that's right. So what happened was at this stage there was violence witnessed on the streets of Colombo, and in fact there was one incident of violence where former cricketer Arjuna Ranatunga's bodyguards fired on pro Rajapaksa supporters who did not allow Ranatunga from entering the ministerial office. While the world powers were cautious and measured in their words, China was actually quick to seize the opportunity. The Chinese ambassador to Sri Lanka met Rajapaksa and congratulated him on behalf of the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Now, this clearly ruffled feathers all around. It was by then clear who would stand to benefit if Rajapaksa gained power.
Yeah,
Okay, so
luckily
getting
the
back to the actual
violence.
event.
Sorry, this one point, so this is luckily the violence has been restricted to the parliament itself and hasn't gone outside parliament, which is a good news, but also a matter of concern that this could easily de-escalate outside parliament.
Right. So that actually is a good segue to what we are about to discuss now. So coming back to whatever has happened in Colombo thereafter, Mohal, can you kind of quickly bring us up to speed about the steps taken by President Sirisena?
Yeah, so Speaker Karu Jaisuriya convened an emergency session of parliament starting from November 5th. And at the request of the so-called incumbent PM Ranil Wickremesinghe, I say so-called because you never know who's the prime minister in Sri Lanka nowadays.
So,
Speakers suspended the 225. Sirisena had suspended the 225 member parliament until November 16th. So the parliament was reconvened. I mean, the whole goal of suspending the parliament was from the speaker propping up Wickremesinghe and having a vote of confidence or no confidence, whichever angle you look at it from. Eventually, the Supreme Court had to intervene, and all rival parties agreed to a floor test to be conducted not for Wickremesinghe but for the new Prime Minister Rajapaksa. So technically, this was a no confidence motion against Rajapaksa by the United National Party or UNP led by Wickremesinghe. So as things stand today, Rajapaksa was defeated not once but twice on the floor of the House amid scenes of pandemonium witnessed in the parliament. The speaker had been attacked multiple times. Many members of the parliament had been injured. Bizarrely enough, I mean, sorry, I'm laughing, but like chili powder, waste paper bins have been thrown around freely inside the aisles of the parliament during the proceedings. Kishore, I think this reminds me of the assembly sessions during the 90s when I think everything used to be a missile to be launched at the opposition benches. I remember bizarrely a UP, a Uttar Pradesh
I,
session when I think mics were freely flung like frisbees at the opposition
yes,
benches.
I remember that. Yes, yes.
So, coming to the political realignments which are happening thick and fast, Kishore, you want to discuss those?
Oh yeah. So we'll have to bring the listeners up to speed on how the Sri Lankan politics is. So technically, we should note that the United National Party (UNP), led by Ranil Wickremesinghe, that's one party, and then the Sri Lanka Freedom Party (SLFP), led by Maithripala Sirisena. These two have been the two pillars of Sri Lankan politics pretty much ever since Sri Lanka became independent. And it is needless to say that they have had bitter rivalries all along. So while you have had SWRD Bandanake, Harimao Bandaranaike, then Chandrika Kumartunga, the daughter, and then Mahinda Rajapaksa, all of them belonging to the left-wing Hinala nationalist SLFP. On the other hand, you have had people like J.R. Jayawardena, then Ranasinghe Premadasa, then Ranil Wickremesinghe, all of them belonging to the center-right market-oriented party bent on economic liberalization. So these are the two primary parties in Sri Lanka. Now, it was a marriage of convenience actually between Sirisena and Wickremesinghe to come together to form a government after the parliamentary elections in 2015 in a joint bid to defeat Mahinda Rajapaksa, who had by then become more powerful than the party he owed allegiance to. So technically, you have people from the SLFP, uh, Sirisena, who himself was a minister under Rajapaksa, coming
Mm-hmm.
out, taking support from Wickremesinghe and then becoming the president. And then later in the year, they had the parliamentary elections, wherein by that time Sirisena had gained back complete control of the party that he belonged to. So these two parties then formed a unity government, which then has been ruling the country ever since.
Mahagathbandhan.
Mahagathbandhan. In fact, it was a Mahagathbandhan, not just a Gathbandhan, simply because the
Mm-hmm.
Sri Lankan Muslim Party, the SLMP, and the TNA, the Tamil Nationalist Alliance, all of them were part of the Gathbandhan. Therefore, you are right in calling it
Yeah.
a Mahagathbandhan. So yeah, so the chief agenda of the unity government was to bring an end to the corruption, investigate the top leadership in the Rajapaksa regime, including his brother and son, and also to conduct a free and fair investigation into the alleged human rights violations during the last Tamil Elam War that lasted until 2009 when they were completely wiped out. Now, yeah, as I told you, Sirisena himself was a health minister under Rajapaksa and had stepped out to challenge him with the support of UNP. Now, post defeat, Rajapaksa stayed away from the limelight for a couple of years, whereas his supporters they floated a new party called Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, which loosely translates to Sri Lankan People's Party or Sri Lankan People's Front, and abbreviated to SLPP. Now, this new party had trumped the UNP SLFP combined in the local body elections in early 2018. So, earlier this year, the new party of Rajapaksa's supporters had become so strong that it had defeated the unity government parties. Now, this led to severe infighting within the unity government, with Sirisena, the president, accusing the Prime Minister Wickremesinghe of going slow on corruption cases and also inquiry into human rights violation.
So
In
this
fact,
shows
in
that
April,
the alarm bells would have been ringing in Sirisena's head when he lost badly in the elections, and that's where probably some of the discord started from.
oh yes, yes. I remember having tweeted back then. I think it was early in March when the two had started fighting, and I had pointed out that things were not so rosy between the two parties. And I
Hmm.
remember a Sri Lankan having trolled me badly that day. But anyway, trolls are part of our life these days. Anyway, so yeah, coming back to what we were discussing. So, in fact, in April, Wickremesinghe actually survived a no confidence motion, which was mounted by Rajapaksa, uh, who
Interesting.
had who had by then sensed that the government was shaky. Now, Wickremesinghe survived to fight another day, but cut back to the present, and now Mahinda Rajapaksa has now joined the party that was started by his followers. So Rajapaksa is no more a part of the SLFP, through which he had become the president of the country. He now belongs to SLPP. And there have been many reports of the SLFP MPs switching sides and joining Rajapaksa's new party. Now, this has badly dented the image of the Sirisena party, the SLFP, and is actually currently, if you look at it, is currently leaderless. Sirisena being a political person, having been the president. Now, Sirisena, through his actions, he has not impressed anyone and is highly unpopular at the moment. Therefore, as much as this is a moment of crisis for Sri Lanka itself, this is a crisis for the party also. And in fact, surprise, surprise, we have seen Chandrika Kumartunga also come out of hibernation and has started
The
issuing
ex
statements.
president of Sri Lanka, I guess in the 90s, right? Late 90s.
In the 90s, yes. And also belonging to the SLFP party. Now, she has
Hmm.
come out of hibernation and has started issuing statements expressing concern about the happenings in the nation and also about the manner in which third party MPs are switching sides in an opportune manner. As if all this confusion was not enough, there have been accusations of horse trading floating around, with allegations of phone calls being made to Wickremesinghe's MP to cross over. So it has been a bizarre, all
Yeah,
um,
I heard
allegations being
some.
thrown in all
Yeah,
directions.
yeah, I heard some reports that MPs were offered like around like 300, or sorry, 500 million Sri Lankan rupees, which equates to like 300,000 or 3 lakh dollars to switch their votes, which is like no small amount of money, any way you dice it.
Correct. In fact, I was listening to an interview by Ranil Wickremesinghe,
Hmm.
who himself was claiming that his MPs were being offered anywhere between 100 million Sri Lankan rupees to 250 million Sri Lankan rupees, which is like
Okay.
more than 1 to 2 million US dollars. So yeah, now with all this political uncertainty, it is not clear who enjoys a majority in the parliament. Wickremesinghe feels that he should get the opportunity to prove his majority in the house, especially after Rajapaksa was defeated twice in the past 1 week. In fact, as we have been recording, news has come out that all three major leaders, Rajapaksa, Wickremesinghe, and Sirisena, have met each other face to face for the first time ever since the crisis broke out. And President Sirisena has been adamant in telling that he will not accept the results of the no confidence motion that was passed twice, and that he wants no confidence motion with the MPs putting pen on paper. So a voice vote is something that he would not want to accept blindly. So that is where we are now. Looking into the future politically too, it is actually a very tightrope walk for Ranil Wickremesinghe. So Mohal, you want to explain what Wickremesinghe's path can be here onwards?
Yeah, so while Sirisena won with the support from Muslims and Tamils and the disgruntled section of Sinhala Buddhists, this momentum. I mean, he won like I believe in 2015, early 2015 in the presidential elections. This momentum was carried on into the parliamentary elections later that year, by which time Sirisena had complete control over the SLFP. Now, politically, Rajapaksa seems to have weakened back then, uh, weaned the Sinhala vote back in his favor. Now, this makes any upcoming elections, whenever it be held, because there's a huge question mark of whether the elections will be held in January or will they be held as scheduled in 2020. This will make any upcoming elections tough for Ranil Wickremesinghe. The fact that the national debt has only increased under Wickremesinghe won't help him get any brownie points of a person being wronged by Sirisena. Even in the short term, let's say Wickremesinghe and Sirisena patch up to have any workable administration, which I have high doubts on because the relationship might have been strained beyond repair. They might be pulling each other down just to get the upper hand till the elections, as the elections come closer in 2020. So, like, there could be a situation where, let's say, even on the other hand, let's say even if Sirisena and Rajapaksa are propping each other up, in the long run, like Rajapaksa could be the winner in my opinion, because Sirisena with his weak political hand might be trying to woo Rajapaksa back to his fold. But I mean, as we have seen earlier reports that due to the constitutional term limits, Rajapaksa cannot be president again. So he might just be using Sirisena for the time being to get back into the into politics and propping up his brother Gotabaya, who was the defense minister, for maybe a presidential run in 2020, and then Sirisena might be discarded in the long run. So in the short term, it could be a win for Sirisena, but in the long term, it is on a dangerous path where the strongman Rajapaksa could make a comeback, climbing on top with the help of Sirisena.
Fascinating. Okay, so let's switch gears and we'll talk about how the whole issue has been looked at as a power tussle between China and India. Mohal, you want to explain that to our listeners?
Yeah, so the domestic economy today is facing several challenges, including sluggish growth, variable foreign investment flows, the high external debt, and pressures on the Sri Lankan rupee. So, a prolonged political crisis could deter any further foreign investment, raise the sovereign borrowing cost, impact debt servicing capacity, and negatively impact growth. Any political instability which says, let's say, there's violence on the streets is going to deter tourists, which is a major source of income for Sri Lanka and could impact their forex position also, I believe. Now, Wickremesinghe has moved away from Rajapaksa's reliance on Chinese capital to service Sri Lankan debt and tried to better find a balance between engaging with China and India as the two dominant powers in the region. However, given the pressures on the Sri Lankan economy, it is unclear whether the return of Rajapaksa will also mean a return to the former cozy relationship with China. Now, Beijing, for its part, has been insistent in its observing the ongoing situation and reiterating that it sees the turmoil as an internal issue of Sri Lanka. But it is quite telling that the Chinese ambassador has already met Rajapaksa and Wickremesinghe, referring to the former as the new prime minister. India, on the other hand, is already wary of Chinese influence returning to Sri Lanka. Reportedly, Rajapaksa sent out feelers to Indian officials over the past few days, but it is likely that they will continue to play their cards close to their chest. However, should Rajapaksa prevail in the end, it will take more than a few meetings to get the Indian officials on his side. New Delhi will remain concerned about his former close links to China cultivated during his term in office. However, events unfolding in the coming new weeks, one thing is for sure: Rajapaksa's premiership risks plunging the country back into economic and potential violence. Sri Lanka is one of South Asia's oldest democracies, and never before has it so blatantly disrespected its constitutional norms.
Yeah, in fact, Rajapaksa, hardly 15 days before all this began, was actually in India and he had meetings with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi also. So, at least the Indians would have been aware of such moves being made in the
Mhm.
larger chess game. But
Yeah,
yeah,
even in the interview back then, he gave to, I believe, Nitin Gokhale of Strategic News International. I mean, Rajapaksa was making the right noises as related to India. I think he personally feels, in my opinion, that he did a huge drift towards China in the last term, and is probably trying to compensate to a more balanced relationship between India and China in the future should he return to power, is the sense that I got from it.
yeah, we have heard this kind of course correction earlier from Nepal too, when Prachanda started making these kind of statements.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So, Mohal, what can be India's choice of action here onwards?
So now India is in a real pickle or dilemma here in Sri Lanka. India, on one hand, cannot be seeing favoring towards either of them, especially while it's unclear that who the people want to vote for in the next elections, wherever it be in the
Agreed.
future.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
India has learned some bitter lessons from the 2015 Nepal experience. So, during that time, to force the hands of the politicians in Kathmandu to give proper representation to the Madhesis living close to the border with India, India forced upon Nepal and a highly unpopular blockade. Now, this backfired spectacularly as the pro-China Communist Party is whipped up huge anti-India sentiment in the next elections to come back to win power. Now, India has to engage in back channel diplomacy because it cannot remain a silent spectator in all this sort of tamasha ongoing in the parliament. They have to engage in back channel diplomacy without taking a overt position officially on the matter. This is something similar to what they did in the Maldives, where they engaged them in back channel discussions with the opposition leaders without trying to threaten or like the military invasion or uh, put out like very harsh statements on Maldives. Because what happens is when you do threaten military action or put out harsh statements, it sorts of galvanizes the anti-India vote in these countries, and it backfires because in the long run it installs a regime which is opposed to Indian interests and gives a leg up to the Chinese interests in this region. So coming back to the China angle, like Rajapaksa, like initially he did offer like many projects to India back in his term, like maybe like a decade ago, but many of the projects were totally economically unviable. So then he went to China. So many people felt that okay, it that he's a pro-China guy, but then many people feel that it was just because of the reluctance of India to engage in many of the projects he went to China. So we have to keep in mind that when India doesn't participate a lot in the nation building exercises in the our neighbors, there is a tendency of these leaders to try to get the best deal from China. So this is something like India has to continuously remain engaged in all of our neighbors to ensure that China doesn't gain a strategic foothold in these nations through political processes.
Yeah, in fact, the point that you were mentioning about India trying to play it safe in Maldives and kind of do something similar in Sri Lanka. At least in Maldives, India knew that people were against the presidency of the outgoing president. But here in Sri Lanka, it's anybody's guess, and it's highly unclear as to who people will vote whenever elections are going to be held next. So India definitely cannot take a chance and be seen as somebody who is trying to impose their choice on the people of Sri Lanka. So I think yeah, it
Yeah,
has
I
to be
think
a tightrope walk for them.
since independence, many times India has intervened in neighboring countries, and it has just sort of cultivated the big brother syndrome that like India is dictating terms to us and they don't know what's good for us. So it just creates this underlying position. So what India needs to do, like not just Sri Lanka but everywhere, is you need to take a good view of you need to draw red lines for the neighbors that hey, these are our red lines, don't cross them. We won't interfere in your matters, but you need to be cognizant of our red lines, and we will help you grow simultaneously. Because if you intervene too hard, it just makes the nation drift away from Indian sphere of influence, unfortunately. And
True,
this
true,
has been
and that
across
yeah,
governments. This has been seen from the first government in 47 to today, a common
exactly,
recurring trend.
yeah, and that is exactly what happened in Nepal also. So every time an Indian Prime Minister goes to Nepal, he kind of has to emphasize that India respects the Nepali sovereignty and
Mm-hmm.
then make
Mm-hmm.
any other statement. So this will always be the kind of very first statement that an Indian Prime Minister makes
Mm-hmm.
whenever he
And
goes
this
to
is
Nepal.
what like we call soft power. Like it is sort of walking like a tightrope where you draw your red lines and also don't want to interfere too much in the neighbors. But like this is what soft power, unlike like the Chinese hard power where they try to dictate terms to others. This is where soft power has longer benefits in the has more benefits in the long run, where you keep a nation happy while they do not cross your red lines.
Right.
So okay, so Kishore, like that brings us to the close of the discussion on Sri Lanka. What are your recommendations for this week?
Okay, so while researching for today's episode, I came up with this fantastic article in Hindustan Times by Constantino Xavier. where he said that New Delhi cannot hope to do a Malay, cannot hope to do a Malay in Colombo, wherein he said that India just waited out for the elections to come in Maldives, but out there in Colombo, out there in Sri Lanka, India will have to be prepared to do business with anybody who comes to power after the no confidence motion or the confidence motion. So, irrespective of whether New Delhi likes that individual or not, it has to be ready to do business with that person. So, that's a fantastic article, and the
Yeah.
listeners can read that. And Mohal, what is your recommendation for the week?
So my recommendation is a fantastic discussion on the Sri Lankan turmoil on Rajya Sabha TV on the Big Picture program hosted by
Hmm.
Frank Raujan Pereira.
Oh, okay, okay. So, both of us have a Sri Lankan recommendation this week.
Yeah, of course it has to be. So that, dear listeners, wraps up today's episode on the constitutional crisis on Sri Lanka and its impact on India. So to continue hearing about such interesting topics, please do subscribe to our channel India Rising and also tap on the bell icon to be notified whenever a new episode becomes available. We would like to hear from you if you have any suggestions or any topics that we would like us to cover in the future. Do remember that these topics should be directly related to Indian foreign policy and its impact on India. Until the next episode, this is Mohal and Kishore signing off.